Alright everyone, thanks for tuning in. Today we've got a 2000 Jeep Wrangler Sahara. And this is actually my friend's, and he actually came to me the other day and said, you know what, I think I've got some coolant leaking, so can you help me figure it out? So upon digging around in there, found out that the coolant from the thermostat housing coming in from here was leaking. So what we're going to do is, since this all looks like it's just been pretty worn through the years, we're just going to go ahead and change that. So here we've got, you always want to put a new gasket on anytime there's a gasket involved. You definitely want to replace it with a new gasket. So we've got a new Felpro gasket for the thermostat cover housing. And also this is a genuine Mopar part. I do like to use genuine parts when replacing things which something like this is mission critical for the engine. So this is a genuine Mopar part. You're not going to need much in the way of tools to do this. There's only 2 bolts that hold the thermostat cover housing together. So I always like to dress the gasket with a gasket sealant. So basically I'm going to apply the gasket, the sealant along the gasket, and it's going to hold it in place on our thermostat cover while we try to bolt it in. It's going to be a little tricky bolted in, but not too much. And that's because I'm not going to remove the radiator fan. We're going to keep that in place, and I'll show you how to get around that. And you really just need 3 tools. The first is a 1/2-inch socket on a little extension, just like this, because that's going to reach the bottom bolt. Then you're going to need a 1/2-inch wrench. I have a little ratchet here at the top. Okay, and if you do a lot of this stuff, or if you just like tools like me, then you can get yourself a pair of hose clamp pliers. I'm going to show you what this does. So instead of using like a monkey wrench or something like that, this actually automatically locks, and you can see how it's got 2 different sizes here, how it can help hold the hoses together. So let's go ahead and do that. The first thing is, let's get the hoses off. So there's 2 hoses here. You're going to see we're just going to do something like this. And that's what these hose clamp pliers are great for. So I'm just going to squeeze like this. And it's going to basically hold it in place for me. That just eases out of the way just like that. Nice and easy. This is especially helpful if you've got like a tight spot in there. So now it's just now we just release that. Very cool indeed. Okay. Okay, and now there's another one down there, so we'll get to this guy too. And that's also kind of the nice thing about this. Oh, actually, it would probably be easier if I just remove this sensor here. I'm going to push on the bottom, and that's going to help release it. There we go. It comes off just like that. I'm going to come this way around into the clamp. Okay, you see it's really kind of stuck in there, so you got to wiggle it around. Okay, let's try that again. So you can see that is pretty tough, and sometimes when you're working on these older cars, that's just part of the game here. So we'll try it again. A nice thing about these hose clamp pliers is that they do lock in place. So now I'm just going to give it a little bit more. Alright, so what we did was, that was giving me a little bit of a battle there, so we hit pause. So I could use 2 hands and get the assistance of my cameraman there, also known as my son. So what I did was that, so I kept this on, and I was able to, this one came off pretty easy. This one had a really hard time. In fact, you could still see that the hose clamp really didn't budge much from the original location. So I'm just going to keep it on there for right now. And what I did was I used a little pry bar just like this to help get the hose clamp moving from off the thermostat cover. So it's just like this. So if this were a hose clamp, I just kind of reached down under there and started pulling all the way around to help loosen the hose, which has been sitting on there for a little while. Alright, so now there's 2 bolts. So the top one, pretty easy enough. So we'll go ahead and we'll start loosening this guy. And we're just using a 1/2 inch. Okay. Okay, you'll see that this one is just a little bit longer. So we'll keep that off to the side. And now we're going to get into the one all the way at the bottom here. You'll see it. It's a little hard to see in the video, but when you're looking at it from the top, if you're standing directly in front of the car, it'll be as clear as day. And you can see how the socket with the little extension just fits nicely in between the fan blades. Don't have to do anything there. Don't have to remove the belt. It's just perfect. Okay. Now this one's going to be a smaller bolt. And let me see if I could get in there with my fingers. Not quite. Now to help ease the bolt out, what I'm actually doing is I'm pushing down with my other hand on the fan belt, on the serpentine belt here, just so I could get a little bit more clearance, and out it comes. And here we go. That's the smaller bolt, so that one goes on the bottom. Now this should just come free there. There it is. And here's the thermostat. So first thing we've got to do is make sure that this gasket comes completely off. If you were going to reuse this, you need to make sure this comes completely off, but we're not going to. So I'm not going to mess around with that. So instead, what we're going to do is we've got to make sure that around here, that the gasket, that there's no remnants of any gasket material. I could see there's a little bit here. There has to be absolutely zero. Okay, now this is a gasket scraper. See, it's got a very thin, sharp edge here. I'm going to start with this. Now, if you don't have this, that's quite all right. You can use sandpaper. Okay, and that's what I'm going to use. And this is it's actually a pretty, not too much of a rough grit. Now this is about 100. So let's go in there. We're going to start just very lightly scraping. Make sure, try to keep the blade as flat as possible. You do not want to gouge this at all. Just like that. There's no rush here. No, it's not a race against time. Remember, this is kind of the fun part too, is being able to do this yourself. So just kind of take your time. Make sure you're getting everything. I could feel that very gummy material right here. And just like a lot of things where you want excellent output, you just want to focus on this one task of just getting all the gasket out. See, there's more down here. Perfect. Wonderful thing is that I'm out here. It's a beautiful day out. We're working outside. My son's giving me a hand, and I'm just in the moment right now, just making sure this gasket is completely off. Wonderful. I want to make sure it's completely off. So actually what I'm going to do is my son's going to stay put right here as he focuses on that. I'm going to move to the passenger side of the car where I can use, I'm a righty, so I'm going to use my right hand to get in this at this angle, and it's a heck of a lot easier. And you're going to see, I'm just going to rub the sandpaper so that it's nice and smooth. This is really important, folks. If this is not absolutely clean, you're definitely gonna get some leaks. And this is a high pressure area, so if this is not seated 100% flat, and if you've got some gunk in here from the previous gasket, you're just gonna be redoing this work all over again with another gasket. Gaskets are generally not reusable, and when you're talking about the thermostat cover, it is definitely not reusable. So anytime you're going to pull this off, make sure you have another gasket. Now I can feel with the sandpaper now that there's nothing left. It's just, I can just feel that I'm standing up against bare metal just the way I want it. Perfect. And I'm going to just do a visual here and make sure that there's nothing left. Yeah, that looks fantastic. I'm just gonna run my finger across here, make sure that there's nothing there. Perfect. Okay. All right, I'm just gonna wipe this clean here. Okay, I'm being very careful not to get stuff inside the engine compartment. The engine. Okay. That is just perfect. Look at that. All right. Now we can prep this new thermostat cover, and then we'll get to work. Now, if you'll remember, on the old thermostat cover housing, there's a temperature sensor here, so we do have to remove that. This is on really tight, so I had to put this in the vise, use a 3/4 wrench, and just unscrew it like that. But this was screwed on pretty tight. So now this comes off fairly easy. Perfect. We're going to have to transfer this onto the new one, but before we do that, we're going to have to clean these threads and make sure we have some clean threads on there. Alright, so now we've got the, so I cleaned the threads, and you'll see that I've got some thread seal on there. So we're just going to get that in there. We're going to use our 3/4 wrench. Okay. Just going to clear out any extra here. Okay, now we've got the housing. It's pretty much ready for mounting, so we're going to get the, it's way easier if we just get the gasket on now. Alright, so now we've got this. You'll see that the surface here is very well dressed and it's ready for us to go. Here's our new gasket. And what we're going to do here, just going to apply it just like that. And anytime you're mounting something in a vertical position, the gasket can easily slide off just like that. So I always like to put just a little bit of this gasket sealer on. And that always helps, just to hold it in place. Okay, you don't need too much here. Just enough to hold your gasket in. And I'm just going to actually use my finger to give it a nice even spread. Okay. All right, perfect. Now we're ready to get the gasket on there. I'm being very careful to make sure I line up all the holes. And perfect. Looks like we're now ready for installation. Okay, we're going to start putting everything back together. Now don't forget the thermostat actually came out. It usually does when we do this kind of work. So we're going to reinstall that. And don't forget the spring side goes in towards the engine. You're going to see there's a little ridge here, and the thermostat will fit perfectly right in that ridge. See that? And it'll just be held by friction. That's when you know you've got that right, when it's seated correctly. Now we're going to line this up so that the sensor plug is going to be on the right hand side, and you should see the bolt holes, and it's just going to go just like that. So we're going to get let's get the big bolt in there first. I'm just going to wiggle this around. I lifted it just a little bit so I could see where the bolt is going into. And I'm going to just get my 1/2-inch socket. I'm not gonna tighten it all the way. I'm just going to get it so that there's just a little bit of room in there for me to get this other bolt in there. So I'm just going to keep it just loose enough. Okay, maybe what I'm going to do is maybe let me loosen it just a little bit more, actually. Okay. And then what I'm going to do to help with this is I'm actually going to take, here, you remember my extension here, I'm going to take this off the socket, and I'm going to hold it just like this, and that's going to help me drive this bolt in, since it is a little tight in there. Okay, with the help of my extension, we got that in there. I can go ahead and pull that out. And we'll start tightening. Again, evenly. So down here first, and then we'll just keep alternating. Okay, now this is an aluminum housing, so you do not want to over tighten. Over tightening will cause it to crack. So be very careful. Okay, it looks like we got everything all nicely bolted in there. So first thing is, we'll get this hose in. Okay, see here, I've pushed the hose all the way down. You'll actually, because you have a ridge here, you're actually going to hear it snap into place. And now we can release our hose clamp pliers. Okay, perfect. Looks really well seated in there. You can see it's all the way at the bottom. Perfect. Okay, now here we're getting the last hose on. So you can see, I just want to make sure I'm pushing all the way down. What I'm going to do is I'm having a hard time with this hose, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to back it off the thermostat cover housing here. I'm actually going to move this clamp further up on the hose, and this will allow me to maneuver the hose into position here. Okay, perfect. All right, so what I did was that we went ahead and replaced the hoses back in. This one was a little tough to get in. So while I had you on pause, what I did was I backed the two thermostat cover housing bolts off a little bit, loosened it. That allowed me to get the hose clamp all the way down to the bottom where it should be, to clear the ridge on the thermostat housing, which holds it securely in place. Okay, now that we've got all of our hoses back in place, we've got the thermostat housing all tightened up. Last thing to do is just plug our temperature sensor back in, and you should hear it click. Bingo. I'm just going to make one last check. Make sure we didn't leave anything in there. It's more common than you think to leave tools behind in the engine bay. Alright, it all looks good. So our job is done. I'm just going to give it a go. Probably just start it up, let it run for a little bit, make sure there's no leaks. That looks like that should do it. Alright, well, thanks for tuning in. Again, this is a 2000 Jeep Wrangler Sahara, and this was changing the thermostat cover and the gasket. It's also a good time, if you haven't done so, to also change the thermostat as well. It's an inexpensive part, and while you're in there, might as well just give it a good, nice new one, and that'll prevent any potential problems further on down the road. Thanks a lot for tuning.